dreary night of November. Welcome, Franken readers, to Sundays with Frankenstein. Slave, I before reasoned with you, but you have proved yourself unworthy of my condescension. Remember that I have power. You believe yourself miserable, but I can make you so wretched that the light of day will be hateful to you. You are my creator, but I am your master. Obey. Franken readers, this is episode 11 of Sundays with Frankenstein. We'll be covering volume 3, chapters 2 and 3 of the 1818 edition today. I am Edward G. Pettit of the Rosenbach in Philadelphia, and joining me today is science fiction scholar and Sherlockian scholar as well. You'll find out more about that soon. Dr. Anastasia Klimchinskaya. Hey, Anastasia.
Hello, cheers, Ed.
Cheers to you. That's a lovely glass you have there. So
thank you so much. And I put some Picard wine in it. I bought some Star Trek Captain Picard wine because there is actually a Chateau Picard in France. So that is what I am celebrating with today.
There you go. Wonderful. All right. That's a good Easter drink. So I have this lovely cocktail called The Demon's Promise. And of course, that's demon, D-A-E-M-O-N. And it is this Art in the Age Thai twist tamarind cordial, which is really delicious. And and grapefruit juice and lime juice. And I've even salted the rim, but it didn't come out as well as I wanted it to. I actually even had this Merlot salt, which was all purple, and it kind of didn't really show up. So, oh well. But I feel like it's a fancy drink, and it's a spring drink. It's sour, but really tasty, and it works well. Yeah, I could put this in my big Frank tiki mug too, and I think it would be a good drink for that. Very juicy. So thanks to Brianna, our chat Igor today, as she has been for most of this series. She'll put the recipe in the chat. We'll also post it with a video that we do on our website. And thanks to Tamworth Distilling and Art in the Age for coming up with this very yummy concoction. You can buy Thai twist tamarind cordial at Art in the Age in Philadelphia, and you can donate to the Rosenbach when you go to their website too. There's little buttons there that you can make donations to the Rosenbach. That was very nice of them to put those up. So, so as it's Easter, and this is like a spring kind of drink, this morning was also, Candy Central in our house. We still do Easter baskets. We all get them. We all have to find it. Well, my wife, she'll hide them. It's like I still get an Easter basket, and the two girls who are left home, and we got a lot of Peeps. Do you like Peeps, Anastasia?
I love them.
Do you? Good. All right.
I realize that they are probably just diabetes on a plate, but I love them.
Well, I love Peeps. And I made, for today's show, I made Franken Peeps. Here they are. This is my workshop of sweet creation here. And I'll put a picture up because it's easier to see.
That's so fabulous. I love that, Ed.
Like those. Let me put a picture up so it'll be easier for people to see my weird creations. There they are. That's it.
And have you torn? You have to tear the female one to pieces, to be perfectly accurate.
No, I want to bring her to life, and then eat her. I just want to eat them both. So this is my Franken Peeps for our Easter show today, and but. You also and we have another program coming up, but I want to hear something from you because you have a project that is come to fruition, and you can reveal it now. It's been a secret project for a while.
Yeah. So back when you were doing Sundays with Dracula, I mentioned in the chat when you were showing manuscripts from Stoker, I mentioned that I was working on a super secret Conan Doyle manuscript project, and I had a lot of questions about what that was, and I couldn't say it, but now I can say, and I can actually share my screen and it'll show you the cover if that's okay.
I can do that. I'll share it. I have it up here.
Perfect. Yeah. So I was asked by a fellow Sherlockian to collaborate on this project that we're doing, where we're publishing a facsimile of the manuscript of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's King of the Foxes, which is this kind of fantastic, possibly supernatural, reminiscent of the Hound of the Baskervilles short story, which I was asked to transcribe and annotate the story. And then the edition comes with essays and scholarship on both hunting in Conan Doyle's oeuvre, and then also, because this is a press that mostly publishes about law, also essays on the legal status of fox hunting in Britain, if that is something you're interested in. But it's meant to be this beautiful coffee table book edition. It'll have some beautiful illustrations. I actually love the cover. You're seeing it on your screen here right now, with the most terrifying fox I have ever seen. No joke. Like the Hound of the Baskervilles can move over, that fox can take over. But yeah, even if you're not particularly interested in fox hunting itself, I think this is a really interesting edition. It's a really interesting Conan Doyle story. There's some Dracula connections that I actually put in the notes. So I think our chat, Igor, will put a pre-order link in the chat if anyone is interested.
That is awesome. And this King of the Foxes story, I don't think I've read this one. Do you know when what's the timeline for that? Was it earlier? Was it an early story?
It was published in 1898, so 1 year after Dracula, which is why I thought the Dracula references were so interesting and why I put them in the annotations. And so that would have been also a couple years before Doyle started writing The Hound of the Baskervilles. And the story has a lot of similarities to The Hound of the Baskervilles. You have this myth of this baby supernatural spectral fox that is hunting the hunters. So you can maybe see Doyle working out some of the ideas of The Hound of the Baskervilles in this short story that he published in, I forget the name of the journal, but it was published sometime around June 1898, I believe.
Great. Oh, I look forward to this. I'm always interested in your Sherlockian endeavors as well. And
thank you.
I just bought one of the books from BSI Press on commissionaires and the league and the military profession that Michael Quigley and I can't remember the other editor did, and I'll certainly pick up this one.
Yeah, I think that one was on military references in the canon, right?
Yeah. So, and it's Sherlockian things I'm always interested in. So that's really
good. And well, Michael Quigley is a friend of mine. He served in the Navy for many years. He did intelligence, so he is absolutely brilliant. I'm sure he did I haven't had a chance to look at that book myself, but I'm sure he did a phenomenal job. So yeah. I'm sure he will love it.
I am looking forward to yours as well, to grow my Sherlockian library along with my Dracula library and my Frankenstein library and all those areas that I really need to build. So, so thank you for that. And just remind everybody, coming up this week on Wednesday night, we're going to have a Frankenstein program. It is called Franken Cocktails. And it is a members only program. It is free to any members of the Rosenbach. The whole bunch of people are registered for it already. And if you're a member of the Rosenbach, you can register for it. And I will have some special guests dropping by. Anastasia, you're going to be there on Wednesday night?
Yeah, definitely.
Anastasia will be there. Maybe some other co-hosts will be there. But there's some special guests, and I'm not going to tell you who they are right now. I'm going to reveal them at the mid-break, who our special guests are. A teaser. Stay tuned. I'll reveal those later, who the special guest for Franken Cocktails will be. And it'll be a fun program. I feel like it'll be like this show, but drunker. So that's that's what I'm shooting for. Since
you brought up Sherlockiana, one thing we Sherlockians love to do, well, first of all, Sherlockians really like to drink, like that's a thing. So one thing we like to do is get very drunk and then attempt to summarize stories from the canon, kind of the way you do drug history,
Yeah.
but with Sherlock Holmes stories. So we should do that with Frankenstein, you know,
Maybe
drunk
that'll
Frankenstein.
happen. Maybe we can do that. We've talked about that with Dracula too, but we're not just drinking here today. We're also talking about Frankenstein, and what we do every week is dissect, anatomize, dismember, and bring back to life this book by Mary Shelley, chapter by chapter, page by page, word by word, as we create our very own conversational annotation of the entire novel. And in doing this, we at the Rosenbach ask you to support us, which you can do by donation. And if you're not already a member, please join the Rosenbach. The basic membership level is called the Mary Shelley level. So that would be perfect for Franken readers to join. And I'll have a little more to say at the break, at the mid-break. Reminder for everybody, if you have a question, there's already a question in the Q&A, and you're watching on Zoom, throw a question in the Q&A. The chat is for you all to have fun, as you always do. So on with the show, because we have, as always, we have a lot to get through. Well, you know, we'll have a lot to say, right, Anastasia? So especially in that second chapter.
These are a couple of very long chapters. I think these are maybe two of the longest chapters in the entire book.
Yes. So let's get to it. Well, where we're at right now in the novel is Victor and Henry are honeymooning, so to speak. They're off on their own little, you know, adventure together in England. They finally reached, and Victor has gone to create where Victor is in England because he wants to create a female creature. Clerval is just on vacation, so he's just having fun, and he doesn't know what Victor is up to. But the chapter starts with, last chapter just ended where they just arrived in England. And this chapter starts, London was our present point of rest. We determined to remain several months in this wonderful and celebrated city. And Victor's, you know, purpose right now, as he says, is to, you know, principally occupied with the means of obtaining the information necessary for the completion of my promise. And he's, you know, he's got some letters of introduction to some distinguished natural philosophers. He has, I guess this is because we never get the details of the creation process. He obviously thinks that there's some people in England who can help him refine it or make it better. And maybe he won't fail as terribly as he did the first time, in that his creature was, but he didn't fail. He just thinks he failed.
I have so many questions about that, and on multiple levels. I mean, like, first of all, unless I'm like misread something terribly, I don't think we actually see him meeting with this philosopher at any point, do we?
No, we don't.
Because he has these letters and he's going to England to meet with this guy, and then he doesn't. He goes off to the Orkney Islands and, you know, does what he did the first time. So that's number one. Number two, he's already created, like, he's figured out the secret of life.
He has discovered the secret of life. Yeah.
What could some philosopher in England tell him that he doesn't already know? But also, third of all, the thing you said, Ed, about how, you know, he's hoping he won't fail this time as badly as he failed the last time. Well, the reason he failed last time has nothing to do with science.
Yeah.
And everything to do with humanity.
Yeah.
And he's not going to learn that from letters of introduction from a natural philosopher. Like, the whole problem is caused by him creating this creature and then abandoning it. Like that's the thing he needs to work on. But of course, Victor's a great flaw, if we want to call it a great flaw, is that he does not realize that that is the point at which the failure occurred. He thinks that the failure occurred at the moment of creation.
Mm-hmm. And it is the kind of, it's for him, it was the failure of what he created was not beautiful. And I don't necessarily mean in a, you know, in just a surface, you know, sense there, that it is, the horror of it is what really, you know, hit him after the creature had been created, and the way it looked was just a reminder for him of this, what he really believes then was this horrible thing that he has done, which it shocks him because he thought he was doing something great, and now he doesn't believe that anymore. But of course, you're right. I mean, and it's the abandonment of the creature. It's the humane part of it that has really made, this endeavor a failure. And he doesn't see that. And we will see a little later today, if he does come to grips with that later as he's creating another creature. He says a blight had come. The only thing he says is a blight had come over my existence, and I only visited these people for the sake of the information they might give me. That's all we get. We don't get any accounts of him talking to anybody or what that might involve. But just the fact that he did talk to them is all that he will say to us. Did you ever read a book, the John Kessel novel called Pride and Prometheus?
I have not, but that sounds like a great
It
title.
is a great book. It is somewhere on my shelf. Oh, here it is. It's on my shelf right here. Pride and Prometheus by John Kessel. John Kessel's a great science fiction author, if anybody doesn't know him, has been for many years. And back before the whole monster mashup thing happened with Pride and Prejudice and zombies, this is before then. John Kessel came up with this idea that he would have Victor Frankenstein, he would mash up Pride and Prejudice and Frankenstein. And I mention it now because this is the place where where his novel begins. Because what happens is in Pride and Prometheus, Victor and Henry visit England, and at some gathering, Victor meets the Mary Bennet, Elizabeth Bennet's sister, the bookish one, the one with the glasses and reads all the time. And this is after Elizabeth has been married to Darcy, and Mary is still unmarried, and he meets her, and they have this kind of relationship. But of course, the creature's following Victor, and the creature comes in and does things, and it's a really great take on both, what Pride and Prejudice is about, and what Frankenstein is about. And I highly recommend it to people.
So what happens to Elizabeth in that? I mean, is she in that novel, or is
She's
she
in it? Yeah, everybody's in it. The whole cast of Pride and Prejudice winds up being in it. They all meet Victor, this scientist traveling from Switzerland, and he of course has to gather bodies, and parts in England. And it's, I wouldn't want to give any of it away because it's really well done and really worth reading. Kessel's a great author. So actually,
I would love. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was because he had originally written it as just a kind of a long story, not even novella length. And then he back, in 2006 or 7, something like that. And then he expanded it into a full novel, which came out in 2018. So.
Well, I was just going to say, I would love to read Elizabeth Bennet verbally eviscerating Victor for all of his moping and brooding, because you know how just incisive and pointed and biting she can be.
But as soon as we hit this section, it all came back to me, that novel. And I was even getting confused a little bit reading it, because I was like, oh, wait, what about when he went to, oh no, I think that was in the John Kessel novel. Like I was getting a little confused as to what incidents were coming up in my brain. But I highly recommend Pride and Prometheus. I actually taught Pride and Prejudice and Frankenstein, I think you noticed, at the same time. I did it at a class at the Rosenbach where we read both of those texts, because Austen last two novels, Persuasion and Northanger Abbey, are published, a year before Frankenstein comes out. But in effect, they do share readers. I mean, there are people reading these two extraordinarily prominent, female novelists at the same time. Those books are, out there in the marketplace. And I thought it would be really interesting to read them both. I think Persuasion is actually the better connection with Frankenstein in the ideas that it has, in the way Persuasion is more almost a romantic novel in the way it's put together. I mean, romantic meaning as a genre, is of the Romantic lit era. than
Well, and
Pride and
also
Prejudice
the
is.
love interest in Persuasion, he is a military officer, and
Yeah.
this is happening during the Napoleonic Wars. Um, and of course, Mary Shelley is very much, you can see the traces of the French Revolution, the Napoleonic
Yeah.
Wars in this novel. So that makes for a
Yeah.
really interesting connection. But that sounds like such a great course, Ed, because, you know, that they are Mary Shelley and Jane Austen, they are contemporaries, but we think of them in such different categories. You know,
Yeah.
Jane Austen wrote these kind of what we call Regency romances, and then Frankenstein is this gothic, brooding science fiction. So I love juxtaposing texts that seem wildly different, but that actually turn out to
Yeah.
have a lot of, you know, points of synergy.
And then you can cap it off by reading John Kessel. So like, who is, as an artist, is mashing them up, and it's really, you know, well done. So, all righty. Little Austen sidelight today. I'm always happy to talk about Jane Austen too, people. But Victor and Henry are off here. Victor says, and Victor says at one point, it's just like in the very beginning, I saw an insurmountable barrier placed between me and my fellow men. This barrier was sealed with the blood of William and Justine. Exactly like the creature, right? I mean, that is what the creature is going through. The creature has this barrier between himself and other people, and it is also sealed with the blood of William and Justine, even more so sealed for the creature than Victor.
If you go through this chapter, he sounds so much like the creature. Like if you read and you pay very careful attention to the exact phrasing, at moments it's hard to tell, you know, did the creature say this or did Victor say this? I mean, at one point he says, I am alone, which is exactly what the creature said just a few chapters ago.
Yeah, this really is especially now, this chapter into the next, this is like the doppelganger chapter after you finish reading, because what you realize is the creature's following him the whole time. He is his shadow the entire time he's here. Victor's just not, he just doesn't literally see him until that moment that we'll hit later.
Well, but also there is a fundamental difference I think we're supposed to realize, in that both Victor and the creature are alone. They are insurmountably separated from their fellow man, except for the creature. He has been forced into this position because he has been rejected. For Victor, it's a choice. I mean, throughout the novel, again and again and again, he chooses to isolate himself from his family, from his friends, from the people who would offer him comfort and sympathy and advice. And then he just kind of goes dramatically, I am so alone, just like the creature said, except Victor chose this.
And he's not. He's with Henry and he's meeting people. Like when the creature says, I am alone, he is. And when Victor says it, come on, you're making that choice. That is how he feels, because he's putting himself in that position. So with Clerval here, he even says, in Clerval, I saw the image of my former self. He was inquisitive and anxious to gain experience and instruction. But, you know, Clerval's not going to screw it all up like you, Victor. Well,
that's because he seems to have actual capacity for sympathy. Sorry, I'm very cranky about Victor in these two chapters. I'm trying to be diplomatic, but
what can you say? You know, I mean, it is the way he behaves. Well, for now, I love this. I now also began to collect the materials necessary for my creation. And this was to me like the torture of single drops of water continually falling on my head. He can't be collecting body parts at this point, because we're still like months away, a year away really, before he starts to create the second creature. But he must be collecting. I guess he couldn't travel with all the equipment that he needed, which makes sense. That all his entire laboratory, he couldn't just ship over. I mean, he could, but it would have been difficult. So he knows that he can get laboratory materials that he needs. And I just wanted to point that out, because I just think it's when he says, I now began to collect the materials, it seems to harken back to what he was saying the first time he did it, and assembling the raw materials of the creature, but not yet.
Well, and the first, I was on the show for chapter 3, which is the first time that he did this. And I think this goes back to something I said at that time, which is, what makes science fiction is that you have impossible things happening that are made possible through what I call a performance of scientific rigor. So the novel mobilizes all of this scientific language, all of this, what we would today call technobabble, to make it seem like these things that are impossible are actually possible in our world, or a world that is continuous in our with our reality, that is not an alternate magical world. So in a lot of ways, it doesn't matter whether he's collecting body parts here or not. It doesn't matter which instruments he's shipping over. Like the details don't matter. What matters is this evocation of scientific language, this evocation of scientific practice that is supposed to remind you yet again that, yes, he's creating life. Yes, he's bringing the dead back to life in a sense, but this isn't magic. This isn't a mythical story. This isn't a fairy tale. This is a work. This is a story happening in a rational world that is practically identical to our own, and he is doing it through the same kind of physical laws and possibilities as our world. Is just, he has gone further than we have, and he knows something we don't yet know.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. But before they get there, before he gets to start doing his actual work, well, first they get a call to go to Scotland. They received a letter from someone in Scotland, and they're gonna head up there in just a little bit, and that's where this will wind up. Well, actually, at the end, we'll wind up in Ireland, but before then, at least in these chapters, we wind up Victor is in Scotland for a while, and I love that just the whole concept of Mary Shelley writing this. She's got them all set in Europe, and of course, we see her put them all over the world, in Russia and the Arctic, and talking about other places of the world like South America and the Middle East and the Far East. This is a very worldly novel, and the characters really have that world viewpoint, but then she's just bringing them home. Let me just bring them to the place where I was from now and see them go through there. And we'll see some interesting things in England and some interesting things that they say, but the Scotland part especially, because some people might not know, Mary Shelley actually spent some time as Mary Godwin before she met Shelley, or maybe she met him in between at some point. We're a little uncertain, but when she was 15 years old, things had gotten so bad at home with her stepmother, Mary Jane Clairmont, who had married her father, that her father and Mary certainly decided, it'd be best if I got out of the house for a little while. So Godwin has a friend, William Baxter, who lives in Scotland over outside Dundee. And Mary goes and stays with the Baxter family. And it's an idyllic time for her, actually, right at the perfect time when she needed it. When she's 15 and 16 years old, she spends almost 2 years with this family. This family was also very radical, loved to read works like Mary's, mother and father had written. And in a sense, they were almost, I think, a little more radical than Godwin had been than Godwin was now. That they were still pursuing, these ideas, and Godwin was more just talking about them with people visiting his house. So Mary went there. She became very close friends with Baxter's daughter, Isabel Baxter. It's a great escape from her stepmother. And actually, when she comes back from, this trip after 2 years, she comes back once and then she leaves and goes back again. There's conjecture that she actually may have met Percy and his wife Harriet in that in between when she came back home first, but she never mentions it. And then later she always says that she met Percy the second time. So it's a little hard to reconcile. Like we know she was back in London when Percy and Harriet had dinner with William Godwin. So people think Mary must have been there because she was back in London, but maybe she was still staying with the Baxters in some other place in London and didn't meet him, because she never mentions that she met Percy earlier than the second time that she met him, or the time that she met him when she comes home for good. And then they elope a few months later. So, but Scotland's very important to Mary Shelley, and I'm not surprised that she places her characters in Scotland. at some point, because that was a place that she really loved, those 2 years that she spent there.
Well, and if we want another Sherlockian connection, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was born in Edinburgh, and he studied medicine at the University of Edinburgh. And if you go there, there's a Sherlock Holmes pub on the spot where he was born, and there's all of these connections. Like, I should be wearing my deerstalker, because the one deerstalker I own, we actually purchased in Edinburgh from one of those street vendors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, there's Sherlockian connections with everything, isn't there? That's one of the great things about Sherlock too, is that you can,
part of,
and it's the interests of Arthur Conan Doyle. I mean, he's interested in everything, involved in so many different things, and so
he went on a trip to the Arctic when he was very young. If you want that connection, but yeah, one of the things about Sherlockiana is that we do this thing called playing the game, which is pretending Holmes is real and his creator fictitious, and we write the scholarship on it, and we will find connections anywhere we want, damn it, because the game is not subject to the same kind of rigor as academia. So we will find that connection, damn it, and then we will write on it.
All righty. The before they get to Scotland, they're still in London, and he says, we quitted London on the 27th of March. Ooh, we're just a few days beyond that date. So I wish I'd remembered that earlier. On the 27th of March, I would have posted about that. And first they go to Oxford, and this is interesting because it's Victor's narrating here about Oxford, and what he's noting about Oxford isn't that it's this kind of center of learning, but what he notes is it was here that Charles I had collected his forces. The city had remained faithful to him after the whole nation had forsaken his cause to join the standard of Parliament and liberty. And then it's the memory of that unfortunate king. And this is really odd at first, because I was like, Oxford as the place to remember the English Revolution. I understand that, Mary Shelley would be really interested in that kind of aspect of it, but that it is this kind of, looking at it as Victor's clearly seems to be on the side of the king and Charles I, not on the side of the revolutionaries who are out for liberty, right?
Okay, so I am happy to go down a rabbit hole here.
Go ahead.
I feel like we should start with, maybe just a quick summary of what happened. So back in the
real quick.
Back in the early 17th century, England had this king named Charles I, who basically dismissed Parliament for many, many years, raised taxes, did all of these things that made people very unhappy. So they had a civil war, basically, at the end of which, in 1649, Charles I was beheaded. So this is a century and a half before the French Revolution, where the French king was beheaded. They beheaded Charles I. They had this thing called the interregnum, where Oliver Cromwell, the guy who led the forces against Charles I, was in charge. There was something called the Protectorate, and then the king was Charles I's son. Charles II was restored to the throne in 1660. The reason I mention it is partly because, so we talked about Paradise Lost at length a couple of weeks ago, and this was something in response to which Milton was also writing. If you think about Satan's rebellion against God in that epic, a lot of readings of that epic are in terms of projecting that rebellion that had happened against the monarchy during the English Civil War onto the events of Paradise Lost. So there is that connection, but also, more importantly, I think we've talked about the influences of the French Revolution on Frankenstein, on Mary Shelley, on William Godwin. William Godwin wrote at length about the French Revolution and those Enlightenment ideals of liberty and justice and equality. Here we have another revolution being evoked, not just the French, but also the English Revolution. And one of the important things that it did is that it kind of made the monarchy less absolute in England. So in France, at the same time, the 17th century, you have Louis XIV in power. Louis XIV is the guy who said, I am the state. He built Versailles. He really made the monarchy the absolute thing that it became in France until the Revolution. At the same time, in England, you have this civil war, you have this beheading of the king, you have this undermining of royal authority, which resulted in Parliament having more power. So again, those are themes that would have been important to Mary Shelley, that would have been important to her father, William Godwin, and to many of the Romantics. But yeah, you are absolutely correct in that Victor seems to be sympathizing with Charles I and not the revolutionaries.
A little later, they will visit the tomb of the illustrious Hampden and the field on which that patriot fell, and the soul, Victor saying his soul was elevated, by, the contemplating the divine ideas of liberty and self-sacrifice. And that seems really very much in line with something that, Mary would be interested in, and Percy especially. Her husband would be interested in. I did check the text to see if Percy's adding this stuff, and he's not. This is all in Mary's hand. These are all her ideas. But
I assume a lot of it is the influence from her father. She would have read what her father wrote about the French Revolution, and if you study world history, there's several revolutions that happen in kind of what we call the Western world that are considered major. The American Revolution, the French Revolution, and the English Revolution, and the Russian Revolution. And so she's pulling from many of these here, and kind of foregrounding their ideals. But I think you have also this kind of romantic, with a capital R, discomfort with what the costs of that liberty and that of justice is, because, as I had mentioned, in France, there was the terror, they had beheaded the king. In England, similarly, it ended with the execution of the monarch. I think that there's this deep melancholy at the fact that these ideals of justice and liberty come at the cost of that kind of bloodshed.
Yeah. And Victor, though, there's an overall thing going on in this section of these visiting, and I think it's in the Harvard annotated by Susan Wolfson and is it Ronald Laveo. And this they have a really cool note on this section talking about the kind of historical tourism that is starting to happen. On the continent, it can't happen until the Napoleonic Wars are over. But in England, there is this idea that you can visit these places and experience the history that happened. And we take that idea for granted, but that idea of the leisure to travel and study places for that very reason is only just starting to develop at this point in time. And so that kind of historical tourism is going on there. And so Victor's being inspired by just the whole idea of the English Civil War. But Victor as a character is also in a battle right now with him as the kind of creator king against his subject who is demanding his rights, the creature. It seems very reasonable to me that Victor would think the poor unfortunate king who, was ruling over everyone when his subjects rebelled against him. And that seems far more appropriate for him than the appeal of the rebels. And the creature.
And I mean, Charles I, like I said, he dismissed Parliament for multiple years because Parliament was kind of trying to tone down the reach of his power, and he was like, no, you're dismissed. I don't want any kind of oversight, which seems to me, like you said, like a parallel, and that the creature keeps trying to appeal to Frankenstein, to his power to do something for him, and Victor is just dismissing him like, that's not my problem, that's not my job, that's not my responsibility.
Yeah. So I kind of like this point in the novel where earlier when, say, like the creature winds up listening to Volney's Ruins of Empire, this text is really going to appeal to these young revolutionary romantic, people who want to change the world. But here she's recognizing that her character may actually be more interested in the kind of royalist position because of what he's done and the position that he's in right now and kind of battling his own subject. There was a question here from David in the thing, and this has to do with this. In the text, you may have the word, because as this was published the first time, he mentions in the narrative about the unfortunate king and his companions, the amiable Falkland, the insolent Gower, his queen and son, blah, blah, blah. And that was actually the way it was first published in 1818 with the name Gower. And it was actually a typo. What she meant to write, or what should have been written, was Goring. And it's usually changed in editions because it's recognized as a true typo. It's just the name is wrong. It's supposed to be Goring instead of Gower, who was one of these historical figures with the king at the time. He actually, like, when he was like on the royalist side, but he was angry at the attention that I think maybe Falkland was getting, or the position Falkland was put in. So Goring then kind of betrays, the king's forces in some way. And David asked a question that, because he notes in Les Klinger that in Les Klinger's annotation, he writes that Gower was Walton's error in hearing the story. So I think it's fun.
It's Les Klinger playing the Sherlockian
It's Les Klinger playing the game. It's like saying, yeah, that typo is because, remember, Walton heard the story and he had to write it all down afterwards, and he remembered it as Gower, not Goring. And that's a fun little thing that Les Klinger puts in his annotated notes. But that's clearly what Les Klinger is doing there. It's a little wink at you that it was actually Walton that made that mistake, not the author Mary Shelley. Now, the rest of his notes, he doesn't play that game for Frankenstein as he did in the Sherlockian annotated, and his Dracula annotated.
Arguably he does, because, whenever Victor cites like a romantic poem, Les Klinger is like, but actually this hadn't been published yet, so he couldn't have cited it. So clearly this is an anachronism. So this was somehow added later.
He does, and he really sticks with that with the game, with the dates and dating the novel. He really wants to try to place it in particular dates, and then also points out all the times where it doesn't do that. But and to do that, yes, he does those winking game-like things.
Well, and chronology is a really big thing in Sherlockiana.
Elizabeth asked if Mary's stay in Scotland would have exposed her to any Jacobite ideas that might have influenced Victor's royalist sentiments. Wow, there's a great question, and I just don't know. I don't remember from reading her biographies or even her letters if any of that crops up in them. And how I don't think the Baxters were Jacobites, the people that wanted to restore the original line of the king that had been knocked out, that had been passed over for someone else. I don't think so. But again, that's something I'd have to research. That's a good question to research. I wonder if that is the case. Great. Let's more historical tourism here. And then he has in between, while he's doing this, he actually has this great metaphor for what he's doing right now. He's saying he's, overcome by ennui. So he's totally, he's totally Werther here. The sight of what is beautiful in nature, or the study of what is excellent and sublime in the production of man, could always interest me and communicate elasticity to my spirits. And then he says, this is what I find interesting, but I am a blasted tree. The bolt has entered my soul, and I felt then that I should survive to exhibit what I shall soon cease to be, a miserable spectacle of wrecked humanity pitiable to others and abhorrent to myself. But it is that
calm down there, Victor.
Yeah, but it's that image, that metaphor that he's using, his, that he is the blasted tree, which harkens back, which echoes his original inspiration for learning science to begin with. Seeing that lightning strike a tree and completely destroy it was something in his youth had inspired him to learn, to seek after knowledge, and it was the lightning itself that had inspired him. And now in his life, he's not inspired by he's not the lightning, he's the tree. He feels like he's the tree that has been struck, and that turnaround that has happened in his life by this point. I think that's a very apt metaphor for the position that he feels that he is in.
Mm-hmm.
Traveling around Oxford, and it looks, and then they move up into Matlock, where there's some mountains, and it looks like
and he visits cabinets of natural history. So these would have been cabinets of curiosity, which kind of preceded museums. Museums got really big in the 19th century, but before that you had cabinets of curiosities, which were usually collected by princes and aristocrats who had the money and who would have been accessible to their friends, to fellow aristocrats, but which would not have been sort of these like public things that you could go and visit. So I mean, I think that's an interesting kind of allusion to this state of science in this moment, where again it's still kind of, science is not this public thing that it would become later in the 19th century. It's still something that's kind of like shut away and only for the select few.
And this is, and these were collected, and you can, and fascinating to see old pictures, or if you can see some of these things in person too. Some of these, excuse me, collections has survived. This is, pre-museum days, when private people would collect scientific or natural phenomena, artifacts, and those collections were usually kind of miscellanies. They were just various objects of different kinds of things, but all really interesting. And his position in life, his Victor's class, allows him to do this kind of thing, that he can visit these things and learn from. And it's a kind of tourism. So
yeah, and for those of you in Philadelphia, the Philadelphia Museum of Art has a great imitation of a cabinet of curiosities on the 3rd floor, I believe. So
yeah,
when the pandemic is over, you can go visit that and evoke your inner Victor. Although he would have scorned the masses coming in to look, probably.
We would have scorned anybody. He wants to be alone. Can I have this entire museum to myself, please? He is starting to worry now. He says, I had neglected my promise for some time, and it's probably been about a year actually at this point. We'll find out. We get a 2-year marker later in this that this trip has been, and he's worried about the demon's disappointment, and he's worried that maybe he will wreak his vengeance on his relatives. Victor said, this idea pursued me. And I laughed out loud because I thought, well, that's not the only thing pursuing you. The creature's pursuing you. And he's worried, and then even says, sometimes I thought that the fiend followed me and might expedite my remissness by murdering my companion. Like he's worried for, so he's afraid to leave Henry alone, except that he always leaves him alone.
What would put Henry in less danger is if maybe you didn't take a year to do what the creature asked you to do, like if you were worried.
Yes. So, but they are going to, so Victor's worried, and they're going to now they visited Edinburgh. And do you want to say some things about Edinburgh before I just blow past Edinburgh?
Well, I mean, I think I said all the things about Edinburgh, which were the Sherlockian connections, but can I foreground this line where it's just before it says they go to Edinburgh? I feel like I have to read this out loud. I felt as if I had committed some great crime, the consciousness of which haunted me. I was guiltless, but I had indeed drawn down a horrible curse upon my head, as mortal as that of crime. And I just have a few exclamation points there in my edition. I didn't even have words. I mean, yes, Victor, you are completely guiltless. You have done absolutely nothing wrong ever.
But I think that is part of this kind of thing that goes on in his mind all the time. And we see it later when he towards the end of the novel with Walton, where he keeps going back and forth, say like, don't ever do something like this. Oh wait, maybe you should be inspired. That Victor is, I think, almost, authentically betrayed here in a way that he walks around feeling all this guilt and saying that it's all my fault, and then he'll still have a line like, I was guiltless. Like he's a mess, and his mind is all over the place. That kind of emotional, wreck or that mental wreck that's going on inside his head is all over this. But for him to say I was guiltless is absolutely absurd, and even he would disagree with it, because he has disagreed with that at times.
Well, and just the whole phrasing of what is happening in terms of being cursed by the gods. I mean, as if this is a Greek tragedy and he has offended some god and he has been cursed. I mean, again, this is not what has happened here. Like the very premise of this fiction is that it does not happen in the world of Greek tragedy where there are gods. This happens in like a modern rational world.
Or it also happens in the Rime of the Ancient Mariner. This is again another little like hint, I think, at the rhyme, of which we've had 4 or 5 already and more to come, but that I was guiltless and I had indeed drawn down a horrible curse upon my head, as mortal as that of crime. I should have pulled out the rhyme and searched for phrases that sounded a lot like that, because they are in that poem. But that's what has happened to the Ancient Mariner, that he has been cursed for a crime that he has done, but it was he's guiltless in a sense because he didn't know that was going to happen. Like he goes through a similar thing that Victor is going through right now. So all righty, well, we're in Edinburgh, and I thought we would travel by map a little bit, and I'm going to show this wonderful map from this. I've showed this before from this library. It is the University of Maryland Libraries has put together this lovely map for the whole novel that you can see all the places that they go through, and who doesn't love a traveling by map? So here's they're in London down here. Let's they're all the way down here. Actually, London's here, and then they travel through here. There's Matlock up here, Oxford, and then Matlock, and then or is this Matlock? This is Penrith. They go there, and then they come up to Scotland, to Edinburgh, and then they'll go to Perth. And I'll show you the whole thing. This is what happens over the next few chapters. And then it's all the way up to the edge here. And this is where, oh my God, all the way up where the Orkney Islands are. So this is where he will eventually wind up. And then there's even a question already for later, and we'll mention this now, that like when he gets to Ireland, is there any notes about the route that he winds up taking? Here's Ireland. When we hit this later, it's impossible. It's impossible that he gets in a little boat here somewhere in the Orkneys and comes all the way around, whether it's through here or around here to Ireland. It's not going to happen. Not going to drift there, and especially in the time that he does it, it's like in a night or a night and a day and a half. So it's not going to happen. But this is where they're at now. Oops, this is where they are now, up in Scotland. And you see, it's far more mountainous up here, so it would actually appeal to them, the Swiss in Victor, and then Victor will hit the Orkneys soon. But before he goes to the Orkneys, they do Edinburgh. They left Edinburgh in a week. Surprising, he doesn't really spend some time there learning for some people, because there's, it's a center of learning. It's one of the bigger centers of learning in Europe. There's plenty of medical doctors. Their medical college is where everybody goes in England to become a doctor. Where Polidori graduated from, University of Edinburgh, to become a doctor. Polidori wrote The Vampire, and was, and Mary and Percy had just met. And then Victor tells Clerval he wants to be alone. And he says, enjoy yourself and let this be our rendezvous. I may be absent a month or two, but do not interfere with my emotions. I'm going to go off and be by myself. And of course, Henry is, doesn't like that, but, what's he going to do? And it's just that, Victor is always making this same mistake. He is always making the mistake of going off by himself to do something. Now, in this one instance here, he almost needs to, he has to finish this on. He doesn't want to let anybody. I agree with him not to let them know at this point. Or, well, no, that's not true. Bring Henry in, will you? Tell him what's going on. It would have helped, certainly, and maybe tragedy would not ensue. If
I just kind of feel like if Victor had told his family about what he was doing, back at the very beginning, his family, who seemed to be human beings capable of sympathy, maybe Elizabeth, they would have told him, this is a person you have created, you have responsibility for him. They would have felt sympathy. They would have encouraged him to, be a parent, to be a creator to this thing he made. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong on that. And I think everything else would have unfolded completely differently.
Yeah, no, I really think that too. I mean, I think that Henry is the one that he would have, he should have told at this point and taken on an assistant for this final experiment. So he's going to go off and visit some remote spot of Scotland and finish my work in solitude. I did not doubt that the monster followed me and would discover himself to me when I should have finished, that he might receive his companion. And before we get to that, let me take a little mid-break here and tell you who's going to be on Franken Cocktails. We bring Sundays with Frankenstein to you for free, as we did Sundays with Dracula last year. So if you'd like to donate to the Rosenbach, you can do so at our website. But I also encourage you to become a member. Members of the Rosenbach get free and exclusive access to some programs, like Franken Cocktails on Wednesday night. That is a members-only program. But members also get 10% off of all of our reading courses. We have a couple new courses starting soon this week, reading Ancient Greek Tragedy with Inquirer theater critic Toby Zinman starts this week. And there's a Shakespeare on Film course that starts next week or 2 weeks from now. Plus, members get 50% off of any paid Rosenbach programs. And of course, the basic membership level of the Rosenbach is called the Mary Shelley level. So what could be more perfect for Franken readers to join the Rosenbach at the Mary Shelley level and help us bring the books and manuscripts in our collections to life. And I want to give a shout out to some new members, people who just joined the Rosenbach over the last week. And joining at the Mary Shelley level, Rebecca and Gary, both from Philadelphia, joined at the Mary Shelley level, and joining at the Abigail Adams level, a little costlier there, thank you so much, was John in Philly and Dave in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. So if any of you guys are watching, thank you so much for your support. And to everyone who has joined the Rosenbach or given a donation, your support helps me make the show. It helps the Rosenbach continue to create programs, and it also helps us care for our collections. So thank you all very much for your support. This Wednesday night, 7 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time. I guess that's 6 o'clock where you are, Anastasia, we start. Mm-hmm. I have a program called Franken Cocktails, an evening of potable creations. It is a members-only program. A whole bunch of people have signed up for it already. Thank you. I hope some more of you will. And if you can't because you're not a member, well, join to be a member and join us. It'll be a lot of fun. I'm going to unveil a new drink that I'm going to come up with just for the show. that we'll have, and I'll talk about some of the other drinks that I've had. So that's the alcohol side of it. But I'm also going to have special guest drop by, and Anastasia will be on. You should just come on for the whole show, Anastasia, if you want. It's up to you, but I would just love to have you on for the whole thing. We might have another co-host on. I'm not sure. We're still trying to work everybody's schedules out, but Anastasia will definitely be there. And I'm also going to have some special guests come in, and two of those will be Jennifer Summerfield and Josh Hitchens will join us. Jennifer Summerfield is a great actor from Philadelphia, and she performed at the Rosenbach in 2018 a solo performance of Mary Shelley, which she wrote herself, about Mary Shelley, and she's going to be redoing that on as a video that we have as a program on April 21st, paired with Josh Hitchens. Many of you who did Sundays with Dracula remember Josh was one of our co-hosts there. Josh has a solo Frankenstein show where he performs the novel himself. That is absolutely fabulous. I've seen it at the Rosenbach. And he's also doing a new version of that, a little bit shorter, that we're going to pair and show together on April 21st at the Rosenbach. But both of them will be on the show. I'll be talking to them about Frankenstein, about the pieces they put together. That'll be a lot of fun. And then on the show, joining us will also be Leslie Klinger of annotated Dracula fame. We were talking about him earlier, and people are constantly talking about Leslie Klinger and this book on our Facebook group. Les also did a Dracula annotated, so we had him on the show for Dracula when we did that. He's done Sherlock, he's done Lovecraft, he's done Neil Gaiman, he's done Watchmen, he's done so many, annotated editions of these, and he's really brilliant, and he's a lot of fun. And
I also don't think he sleeps.
Yeah, with the work that he does, I can't imagine that he does. So Leslie Klinger will be on the show, and on Wednesday night on Franken Cocktails, he'll be part of our little party. I think it'll be a lot of fun. I think it'll be we'll try to have the same kind of fun we have on this show, but it'll be a little drunker. So that hopefully will be
just a tad.
It will work out. So I hope you'll come on Wednesday night. You can register at the Rosenbach website. All righty, back to the show, because now he's getting to the Orkneys, and then we'll get to the next chapter, and he arrives up here in the most remote place connected to Great Britain he could go to seems to be the Orkney. It's the farthest north. Not many people live there, and he notes that it was going to be the scene of my labors. And again, we have that Mary's constantly putting that labors metaphor in there, as if he's giving birth to something, because in a way he is. And this place is fitted for such work, being hardly more than a rock. The island itself continually beaten upon by the waves. The soil is barren. Few miserable cows and oatmeal for its inhabitants. 5 people live there on this one little island that he's going on. And there were 3 huts on the island, and he's able to get one of them. The thatch has fallen in, and the walls are unplastered, and the door's off its hinges, and it's just the squalidness of the most miserable penury, he says. So I thought, this is his new filthy workshop of creation. What was already filthy first. So he's, when he comes in, he's already taken care of it.
It's not a workshop of filthy creation. It's a filthy workshop of creation.
There you go. I also notices he's shunned by the poor who he helps there with money. He says, as it was, I lived ungazed at and unmolested, hardly thanked for the pittance of food and clothes which I gave. So much does suffering blunt even the coarsest sensations of men. Oh, you think so, Victor? Maybe you should have listened to your creature and how that whole process works.
Yeah, I read that line, and I literally wrote, like, you're almost there. You almost got it, Victor. Like, yep. Yeah. suffering tends to make people do bad things and turn against their fellow creatures. And do you think maybe that might extend to the creature you have created and who has since known nothing but suffering?
Kristen has a question here. This kind of comes along with what we're talking about here. That do you think Mary Shelley meant to create an unsympathetic character? It seems like none of us have any time for Victor. LOL. Something I'm always talking about, that that Victor is. I think Victor would have been far more sympathetic to Mary and her early readers, in the sense that, not that you would want to be him, you would recognize that he made terrible mistakes and did awful things. But I think her early audience would have seen him more in the Byronic hero light than we do now.
Yeah, I mean,
he's hard to like.
He's very in line with a lot of characters, a lot of romantic capital R characters, and that was kind of, I don't want to say the fad back then, because that's something like ephemeral, but I mean that really was kind of just the style back then. I think in the present we have a lot of patience for that kind of thing, and that's true for a variety of reasons. I think maybe because in a lot of ways we've left the romantic sensibility behind, and we live in much more of a realist with a capital R kind of world, where that's what we expect of our fiction, unless we're watching melodrama or soap opera, but then we recognize it as like a separate category. I think part of it is also just how widespread Frankenstein is in popular culture, and I think a common truism is that, Victor was wrong. Victor is the monster. Victor did not take responsibility for his creation. But with all that said, I mean, I do think that in a lot of ways, you are intended to read the story and judge Victor and figure out that what he did wrong was not creating the creature, but what he did after, and that he's just completely failing repeatedly to grasp the situation. But again, I think they would have had a lot more patience for those flaws than we do.
And he's starting to learn a little bit here now, or he's at least reflecting on these things that he's done. He's reflecting more than he did originally. At the very end of this chapter, as I proceeded, it became every day more horrible and irksome to me. Sometimes I can't work, and it's, and sometimes I work a lot. It's a filthy process, he says. During my first experiment, a kind of enthusiastic frenzy had blinded me to the horror of my employment. My mind was intently fixed on the consummation of my labor, and my eyes were shut to the horror of my proceedings. But now I went to it in cold blood, and my heart often sickened at the work of my hands. That is a detestable occupation, immersed in solitude. He's at least reflecting. Of course, none of that reflection is, it's what I did afterwards that made this such a mess, which, which is what he should be learning, or at least what we seem to take from the text. But at least he's thinking about it. And he finds himself in the same position, and he doesn't want to be there, and that will affect what he chooses to do at this point now. So we're in chapter 3. Again, he reflects. It's more reflection. I sat one evening in my laboratory. The sun had set and the moon was just rising from the sea, and he has this train of reflection. And then 3 years before, I was engaged in the same manner and had created a fiend whose unparalleled barbarity had desolated my heart and filled it forever with the bitterest remorse. That's what the creature has threatened.
Okay, but again, he says, I had created a fiend whose unparalleled barbarity had desolated my heart, but he didn't make him that way. Like, the creature makes it very clear that he was made good, like he came into the world good, and it was the mistreatment of human beings that rendered him evil. And again, I mean, not to beat the dead horse for like the millionth time, but again, it's Victor misunderstanding that he did not create the creature to be barbaric, or, well, in a sense, you could say that he made the creature a feat of unparalleled barbarity, but not through the act of creation, but rather through his treatment of him. That is how he made him into
his abandonment.
That, yes, that refusal of responsibility, that rejection.
But at least this is leading him to now think about what's going to happen with the second creature before. And he hadn't done that with the first time. He hadn't thought like, well, what's, he was like, it's going to be great. And then it wasn't, at least for him. And then this time is at least thinking about that. And I really like this because as we had talked about, I don't remember who it was with, Dan, you, about the creature first proposing the female creature, and neither one of them, neither the creature nor Victor, take any account of what this female creature will want. Like, just like, oh, we'll make her, and of course she'll love me. And Victor's like, okay, I'll just make her for you. That they really...
I think it was Dan, and it was a very insightful point. Yeah.
That now he's starting to think about this, he's going to create another being of whose dispositions I was alike ignorant. She might become 10,000 times more malignant than her mate and delight for its own sake in murder and wretchedness. I mean, he still thinks the worst of his creation, that it could become, she could become something really, murderous and horrible. But also that she might refuse to comply with a compact made before her creation. You think maybe she's going to say no? And the scenario, the scenario he describes is James Wales's Bride of Frankenstein. That she might, they might even hate each other. The creature who already lived loathed his own deformity, and she might turn with disgust from him to the superior beauty of man, which is exactly what happens in James Wales' Bride of Frankenstein, when they create the creature and poor Boris Karloff Frankenstein is like he's so happy, and she just is going right for her creator, right to Henry Frankenstein in the movie, Colin Clive. Victor recognizes, hey, that she might have a choice, and she might choose something different than he would normally do. I find that a tiny step for Victor in learning responsibility,
and just the realization that the beings you create have desires and needs of their own that have to be taken into account because they're living beings. I mean, that's already a recognition of the personhood and the interiority, in a sense, of another creature, which, as we've seen, and as I've talked extensively about sympathy, that's something that Victor has struggled with, this recognition that other people are their own beings who have their own feelings and their own desires that he needs to in some way recognize and understand and relate to.
And not only that, but also consequences too. To go along with that, he doesn't think about the consequences of this. And that's the thing that he's at least looking at now. And he's afraid that these two creatures could spawn a race of devils. And
your wife put in a great comment in the chat. She was like, my children have their own ideas. What?
Yeah, they have the ideas that I've given them, right? They don't. They have their own ideas. And just as these creatures will, and Victor's expecting the worst, but I also like this change that's happened in him creating the second creature, because he also says, had I right for my own benefit to inflict this curse upon everlasting generations. Now, he should be saying, do I have the right to create these beings, and what responsibilities I will have towards them? He's taken at least a step getting towards there. He's thinking about other people that will be affected. But I shuddered to think that future ages might curse me as their pest. It's all about him. Whose selfishness, but at least, hey, I'm being selfish. Yes, you are, Victor. Whose selfishness had not hesitated to buy its own peace at a price, perhaps, of the existence of the whole human race. I compare that future ages thing with him early on creating the original creature when he said a new species would bless me as its creator and source. Many happy and excellent natures would owe their being to me.
He's obsessed with his legacy. It reminds me, if any of you have ever seen a show called The Expanse, the head of the United Nations wants to start war with Mars, and there's this moment where he thanks someone for, thank you for talking me out of it. You know, my legacy would have been death and destruction, and the person who's talked him out of it is kind of, you know, the look on her face is devastated, because the reason she's been trying to talk him out of having war, like going to interplanetary war, is not because of his legacy. It's because when you go to war for no good reason, millions of people end up dead. And it's just same kind of thing, or it reminds me of it, where it's just he cares so much about his legacy. He is, I mean, I think the reason he created the creature in the first place in the early chapters is he was young and he was ambitious and he wanted to do something no one had done before and be recognized for it by other scientists, by other people. So it's this obsession with his legacy that doesn't seem to have left him in any way. It's I mean, is it really about compassion for all the people that might be murdered and destroyed if this new race of creatures starts killing human beings? Or is it the fact that's what his legacy would be?
And he's moved from this. At first, he is thinking about what these new people that he has created, what they will owe to him, how they will bless him. He even says, no father could claim the gratitude of his child so completely as I should deserve theirs. Like, ridiculous thing to think about. But so he's focused on these new beings, and now he's focused on other people who will be affected by these new beings. But at neither time, but in neither reflection does he center in on what I owe to the creatures that I create. That's where he should be, you know, focusing on, and just can't do it. So he I tremble. You want to read that? I trembled. Read that whole 2 paragraphs there.
Okay.
This is it. This is the creation of the second creature, and this is what happens. Go ahead.
I trembled and my heart failed within me when, on looking up, I saw by the light of the moon the daemon at the casement. A ghastly grin wrinkled his lips as he gazed on me, where I sat fulfilling the task which he had allotted to me. Yes, he had followed me in my travels. He had loitered in forests, hid himself in caves, or taken refuge in wide and desert heaths. And he now came to mark my progress and claim the fulfillment of my promise. As I looked on him, his countenance expressed the utmost extent of malice and treachery. I thought with a sensation of madness on my promise of creating another like to him, and, trembling with passion, tore to pieces the thing on which I was engaged. The wretch saw me destroy the creature on whose future existence he depended for happiness, and, with a howl of devilish despair and revenge, withdrew. And just reading that aloud, I understand what Mary and Lauren said about all the commas in Gothic novels, so that you could read it aloud and pause for breath. It's like comma, comma, comma.
Yeah,
okay,
it helps.
good, I can breathe.
It helps your pacing. It pay
helps you
attention
breathe,
to punctuation. It really does help. So that scene is, I think, the most horrible scene in this novel of him. And this creature that he is creating isn't even technically alive. I get that. But it's the optics, right? It's the witnessing. There is a female being on the table, and Victor tears it apart with his hands. That is, it's.
Are you going to tear apart your peep, Ed, in sympathy?
I am. Yeah, there you go. So eat that. Pulled off the head. But it is. I can't talk. But it's brutal. and it strikes you as murderous, or it strikes me as murderous, that, and it's also in a way, Victor's now completed the process of becoming exactly like his creature, in the sense that the creature has destroyed Victor's loved ones, and that is the most monstrous thing he has done. And Victor has destroyed the potential loved one of the creature. And they're both murderers in a sense. Now it's the asterisk there, because he hasn't brought this being to life, but what that female being represents to the creature who is watching him do this, she is his, mate that he can see there. She is a loved one for the creature, and Victor just tears her apart on the table. The creature, just the wretch, and Victor can't, and it's almost, and the way he does it too is, he finally sees the creature looking at him, and the creature looks like, yes, you're gonna do it, and he's smiling, this ghastly grin, and he's gonna claim this, and it's almost like out of spite, isn't it? That Victor just sees him as like, oh yeah, I'm not gonna do this for you, and he tears it apart. Now he's prefaced this by talking about how he doesn't want to do it anyway, but in the moment, it seems like a moment of spite. That I'm making you suffer by destroying this.
Well, because Victor has referred to himself previously as a slave, which I have so many opinions about, given the actual presence of slavery in the world at the moment this was being written. But
we're gonna talk about that when we get to that slave quote later.
He's called himself a slave multiple times, and made so by the creature's demands. And Victor is the type of person who does not like that kind of set of power relations. He is used to being the master, and what scientific pursuits give him is mastery over life, mastery over death, even mastery over the natural world. It's this Western ideal of science as mastery over the physical world. And then this creature is his master in a lot of ways. And Victor is in the position of being subject to that. And he does not like that at all. He does not like being placed in that position at all. So it seems, it's like, when you're a little kid and your parents tell you what to do, and you do exactly the opposite of what your parents tell you because, you don't like being told what to do. Victor does not like being told what to do.
Yeah, I'm never like that. I never do that. So I'm never like, if you tell me not to do it, all right, I understand. No, and that wanting to do the opposite is, that's there. But this goes far beyond that, because this is Victor, like, really intentionally hurting the creature by acting out this way. So somebody asks as a comment here, which I think is interesting. It's interesting that Victor reflects on the danger of a living, self-aware female creature and then dashes her to pieces. I wonder if this is Mary Shelley's commentary on the fear men have of female independence. Yeah. You want to comment on that? I mean, I really see that. I mean, the whole way women are treated in this novel is, I think, Mary Shelley's critique of the way women are treated in the world, that she is definitely bringing her, her mother's, teachings into her works.
I mean, let me just read something that Victor says about this female creature. And she, who in all probability was to become a thinking and reasoning animal, might refuse to comply with a compact made before her creation. I mean, if you did want to make that reading, I think that phrase is right there for you to take and say, absolutely. Well, women come into the world. A woman like Mary Shelley, a woman like Mary Wollstonecraft, she would have come into the world with certain expectations of what her place and what her role would be. And I mean, she is a thinking and a reasoning being, and she didn't agree to any of those things. That is not the role she wants for herself in the world. So I absolutely think you could make that reading of kind of a commentary on the way that a woman coming into the world, being
Yeah.
born into the world is her own being. And Victor is very uncomfortable with that.
Yeah. I mean, from the start, it was two, you know, males getting together, talking about creating a female and exactly what the purpose of that female would be for both of them. And we're right at this point, before, you know, before he sees the creature, he's worried what she will do. And absolutely, I see that as Mary Shelley's commentary on the position of women in her world, and unfortunately, you know, still exists in a lot of ours.
Yeah, somebody made a comment about the creature behind me, so I have to show it off. This is my University of Chicago Phoenix. It is not a chicken. Somebody thought it was a chicken, so I have to rectify. It is a phoenix, because that is the University of Chicago mascot.
All righty. So if you burn that university down, it will arise anew.
Excuse me. Yes. Excuse me.
Victor, the creature leaves right away. And then I love this little suspense thing going on when he's worried about the creature, you know, coming back, and and he's walking around and outside, and he's worried. And then he goes in and he says, I heard the creaking of my door. And then a little after that is the sound of footsteps, and the door opened, and Mary Shelley takes their time by bringing the creature back into the room. It's funny because usually in movies, the confrontation happens immediately. Like, you know, the creature, I mean, in movies that are doing this scene, he destroys the creature, and the new creature, and then the other one will break him through the window or something like that, and they immediately, you know, have it out. But she's taking her time with this, and the creature slowly comes in, and then you have destroyed the work which you began. What is it that you intend? Do you dare break your promise? I have endured toil and misery. I have endured incalculable fatigue and cold and hunger. Do you dare destroy my hopes? I mean, this is the dissident being, demanding, questioning its creator, questioning the rights that it has and what the creator owes to his being. And then we get into and then he uses slave, which is absolutely fascinating, and we definitely want to talk about that some. But he says, slave, I have, and this is a creature calling Victor slave. Slave, I before reasoned with you, but you have proved yourself unworthy of my condescension. Remember that I have power. You believe yourself miserable, but I can make you so wretched that the light of day will be hateful to you. You are my creator, but I am your master. Obey. So what is it particularly that interests you, that you mentioned that her use of the word slave here,
Well, so this is not the first time that comes up, because in an earlier chapter, I think it was last week when Den was on, Victor also referred to himself as a slave, which it's so like it's so Victor just kind of being completely unprivileged and unaware of his privilege, and just so frustrating, because, you know, again, one of the many ideas kind of in the air during the Enlightenment, as you're talking about liberty and justice and equality and how to make a better society, is there's a lot of writings about emancipation, about freeing slaves, about ending the slave trade. And this is something that was actually done during the French Revolution in the 1790s. France abolished slavery, but then Napoleon, when he came to power as emperor, he brought it back in 1804. And this is something, if I'm not mistaken, that William Godwin, I think, wrote about as well. And so there are actual enslaved people in the world at this moment in time who are being traded like property all across the world. This is something that many European thinkers who consider themselves enlightened are arguing against very adamantly. And then Victor is just here, you know, just kind of using this term to talk about how oppressed he is. And it's very myopic. It's very kind of short-sighted and just disrespectful, for quite frankly.
And the table, well, for the characters, the tables have turned, and we know that, and already. And Victor has kind of been coming to the realization that the tables have turned, that he is the creature, the being he created now rules him, and the creature's letting him know that. There's a fascinating note in this again, this Wolfson annotated about that slave use of the word slave there. The creature's revenge will be to remake his creator in his own image, turning Victor, his name now ironic, into his double in misery and wretchedness. I love that idea that now what the creature has been doing all along is creating, we keep talking about the similarities between the two of them, and how, Victor is finally at the point where he's like the creature, and it's, in a sense, the creature has created him in that way. But the language of master and slave is embedded in the abolition controversy. Frankenstein was first published after about a decade after England abolished the slave trade. Frankenstein alludes to both sides of the debate. This I find interesting. It is reactionary due to the alarm of subhuman creatures acquiring power, and progressive, a recognition of how maltreatment of abject creatures as subhuman can lead to social crisis. That it is.
So what is that edition, Ed, that you're reading from?
Because that annotated Frankenstein from Harvard.
Okay.
They did all the Jane Austen novels, and this one and a few other, and they did a picture of Dorian Gray. It's the Belknap Harvard Press. So it is, but that idea that slavery is one of the issues that's in the air when Mary Shelley is writing this. And so if she's using that terminology, it's certainly, the ideas around her are affecting how she writes. But that both, that fear and that anxiety over the people we have enslaved will come back and hurt us because we've done that to them. But also the idea that, well, we created that, animosity and that hatred by the way we treated them. So that, and that we, being that this is the white ruling class of Europe, worried about this. So
Adam writes in the chat, and this is so interesting that I have to mention it. During Shelley's time, Foreign Secretary George Canning used Frankenstein as an allegory about the dangers of releasing slaves to freedom. So clearly this is a reading that would have been seen and that would have been understood by contemporaries.
Frankenstein becomes a metaphor for any kind of people rising up against their, against the ruling class. There's an Irish Frankenstein when, the people in Ireland are trying to, but what's fascinating is that in those, when people use those images, they're calling the creature the Frankenstein, like it's the Frankenstein run against them. But what they should recognize is that they are the Frankenstein people in power. They are Frankenstein, and that's but they fail to see that. So much.
Well, it's interesting because that turns Frankenstein into a novel, much like Paradise Lost, because for the Romantics, Paradise Lost was this great story of rebellion that had relevance to all the revolutions going on at the time, and then Frankenstein seems to become, as you just said, it's mobilized as this kind of great novel of rebellion and of rising up in the same way that Satan had become this heroic figure to the Romantics.
Elizabeth G has this really interesting question here, that in Les Klinger's new annotated Frankenstein, he points out that the creature leaves for a few hours before confronting Frankenstein. And Elizabeth's question is, what is going through the creature's mind? Why doesn't he react right away to the destruction of his mate? You want to hit that first, or?
I mean, I think there's a couple answers. I think the more practical answer is that we've seen the way that the creature is capable of just if he's made angry enough, murdering on the spot without being able to control himself. That's what he did with William. So perhaps it's the creature's realization that I need to take myself out of this situation so that I don't murder Victor here on the spot for whatever reason, maybe because he wants to keep Victor alive to see if he could blackmail him into creating a companion in some other way. Like he doesn't want to close off those possibilities. Like he just wants to remove himself from the situation before he makes it worse. The other, I think, kind of a more compassionate reading is that the creature needs to process what is happening because it is the destruction of all of his greatest hopes for companionship, for happiness, that have been destroyed. And he needs to go process that and brood the way that Victor also needs to go process things and brood and just fall asleep on his boat in the middle of the sea.
And they both do the same thing. The creature leaves and broods, Victor leaves and broods. He walks around the ocean and are looking at the ocean and doing it. They both do the same thing as well. Reflecting
those romantics loved their brooding.
Yeah. Well, and it's the experience, and then recollection and tranquility is what you're supposed to do. So they're both kind of doing that. It is interesting. And like I mentioned earlier that, in film versions, when they do this, he usually breaks right in. There's no time in between. But in the novel, there is. So I think what it says about the creature is that he is at the point where he considers what he does before he acts now.
It's not even necessarily that he considers what he does before he acts. It's this realization that I am in this emotional state where I cannot control my actions, so that I need to remove myself before I do something that I regret. And I don't specifically know what that thing might even be, but I'm going to go away before I do something that will, make things worse. And once I've calmed down, I can figure out what to do about Victor, and maybe I can make him suffer a fate worse than death, as somebody in the chat said, or I can blackmail him somewhere. Like he can figure that out later when he's in his rational mind, but he's not in his rational mind, and he realizes this, and so he needs to take himself out of the situation.
Yeah, definitely. Letting someone know to change their chat to. If you're in the chat on Zoom, if you want to check and make sure you're chatting to all attendees as well as panelists. So there's a little thing you can change the chat thing on there. So I always feel bad when people chat and they don't know that nobody's hearing them. So and that's been going on with somebody. So I've sent out a couple reminders. The Paradise Lost. You mentioned Paradise Lost a little bit ago, and that turns up again here, or at least an allusion to it, in that the monster is he says the monster saw my determination in my face. The creature is before then the creature is he's threatening Victor, but then he says, shall each man find a wife for his bosom, and each beast have his mate, and I be alone? I had feelings of affection, and they were requited by detestation and scorn. Man, you may hate, but beware, your hour will pass in dread and misery, and soon the bolt will fall, which must ravish you from your happiness forever. I think that's the lightning bolt image again, unless it means a bolt, meaning kind of fastening or something else falling. But the creature says, but revenge remains revenge, henceforth dearer than light or food. You, my tyrant and tormentor, shall curse the sun that gazes on your misery. Beware, for I am fearless and therefore powerful. I will watch with the wiliness of a snake, that I may sting with its venom. Man, you shall repent of the injuries you inflict. And he's calling Victor man, which is fascinating, because Victor's no longer the God creator, right? Now he's just a vulnerable man, and the creature is letting him know that, like, you're just a man. I can destroy you, just like you destroyed that creature of mine, the female, and you can't destroy your created being. Like, he's literally letting him know that, like, there's nothing you can do. Like, I would just beat you to a pulp. But it's more than that. He wants to put him in the pit of misery. and the Paradise Lost echoes here are that first question: shall each man find a wife for his bosom and have his mate and I be alone? This is what Adam asks God in Paradise Lost.
Well, but also, so in Paradise Lost, as we know, the devil, Satan, turns into a snake and goes into the Garden of Eden and tempts Eve,
Yep.
With the wiliness of a snake. But the reason he does that is revenge, which I think is very important to know, because Satan has failed in his rebellion against God. And instead of, accepting that, he says, well, I will destroy God's favorite and most beautiful creation by corrupting them. And he does that by turning into a snake. So I think that reference to revenge and then that reference to the wiliness of a snake, I don't think that's accidental.
No. And what's fascinating too is again, the creature understands that he is like both of those characters in the book. He is like Adam, and I need a mate, and you should give me that. But I'm also like Satan, and in seeking revenge, and understands that that's part of it. Or it's because he read Paradise Lost that this is why he makes these requests and comes up with these conclusions of how I'm supposed to behave. That what he has learned is what he will become. So, and then he comes and he gives the big threat, the demon's promise, I call it. That's my drink, the demon's promise. He says, Victor tells him to leave. And then he says, it is well I go, but remember, I shall be with you on your wedding night. And that's his big threat. And then he leaves, and Victor's like, yeah, I would have seized him, but he eluded me, like you were going to do anything. I can't help but read those lines like that. Like Victor's Brett, like, yeah, I would have seized him. You wouldn't have seized him. But right at the end of it, where he sees the creature gets in a boat which shot across the waters with an arrowy swiftness and was soon lost amid the waves. And that's the second time that's happened. I mentioned it last time. That echo, and that keeps echoing, that when Victor first comes across the creature in the Mer de Glace, when they finally leaves, he loses him. He says, hey, I lost him. The creature was lost in the mountains or whatever. And now here he's lost amid the waves. And it's the last line of the novel as well. He's soon lost in distance and darkness. But that keeps echoing here. The Victor, or then later Walton, seeing the creature just kind of fade away. Victor immediately thinks, I will be with you on your wedding night. That means he's going to kill me on my wedding night. It's
not like there's going to be another person there.
Yeah, really?
It's definitely me, and I'm
the wedding night. That's me.
I'm okay dying as this great martyr.
He does worry that, Elizabeth will mourn him when the creature destroys him. That's that's the extent that he will be barbarously snatched from her on their wedding night. This is Victor has not.
How considerate of Elizabeth's feelings, which he didn't seem to be particularly worried about how Elizabeth felt when Justine was killed.
Yep. We will get to the worst thing he ever asks of Elizabeth next week. But again, he is not considering. He hears that threat and it's about him. It's not about those around him who would affect. And then he says, I walked about the aisle like a restless specter, separated from all it loved and miserable in the separation. I mean, of course, yes, just like the creature, Victor and the creature do the same thing, think the same way, but the creature has made you this way. Just as you made the creature that way by abandoning him, the creature has purposefully done things and shaped your life to this point now, since he's met you, or actually since he's been alive, to make you into like him. So it's odd that Victor's, it's that whole, in Paradise Lost, or in the Bible, God makes man in his image, and Victor fails to do that with his creation, but the creature kind of turns the tables in a sense and makes Victor into his own image. So Victor mentions it. Oh, it's a year. Okay, I was saying 2 years earlier. It's not. It's a year. He says nearly a year had elapsed since we had quitted Switzerland. So this is a whole nother year away from home and away from Elizabeth and his family and where he's supposed to be. It took him a whole year to get to this point to do this, and then it'll be a lot longer to get back. Actually, even longer to get back. Victor's got to clean up. He goes back to the scene of my odious work, and it's interesting that it's the utensils, the sight of which was sickening to me, right? That it is, it's not the torn apart body there that, and any other parts that might be around. It is actually his scientific apparatus which sickens him. That Victor doesn't, this is almost, this is so unfeeling on his part. This is almost, like he's, what do you call it? He don't have any feelings. He, Victor, and he even says he almost feels like it is, he sees the remains of the half-finished creature whom I had destroyed lay scattered on the floor. And I almost felt as if I had mangled the living flesh of a human being. So yeah, it's not living. I get it, Victor, but you need to recognize what you did had that same murderous intent. And then he realizes I ought not to leave the relics of my work to excite the horror and suspicion of the peasants. You think, like, what would they think coming in on this scene? Clearly, a serial killer has moved to the island, which would be pointless because only 5 people live there. I mean, that's not,
It's like these Nordic murder mysteries that my parents have, procedural murder shows my parents have loved watching, where it's set on this like remote island where like 7 people live and there's murder. It's like the murderer is one of the 7 people who live on this island in the like North Sea.
And that's the classic division of monster stories. There's a monster outside or a monster inside, and there's the monster is inside. The call's coming from inside the house. But he cleans up, thankfully, so no one is horrified of what's been going on here. And he puts the remains in.
He didn't seem to be all that worried about that the first time he made a creature in this.
No.
He's like, yeah, I'm just going to
leave.
Who
cleaned up? We hit that issue. Like, who cleaned up?
I mean, Clerval apparently went in there and suggested and maybe found some body parts, but was probably like, oh, yeah, that's chill. That's just like what undergrads
do. That's
what
science they do. They work. Yeah. So, but it must have been horrifying to look at the condition of that laboratory. And this one's even worse, being where it is and how he's had to set it up. But he puts he takes the remains. I accordingly put them into a basket with a great quantity of stones and laying them up, determined to throw them into the sea that very night. I like this kind of getting rid of the evidence. So it's not, he has to completely get rid of the evidence, as if he's committed a crime. Oh, maybe you did commit a crime in some way. He also says, I found this out. I felt as if a film had been taken from before my eyes, and that I, for the first time, saw clearly that he doesn't have this burden of what I have to do for this creature now. And that he feels like I'm kind of, I don't know. He doesn't feel any freer, but he thinks he sees more clearly now. And I mean, I don't see that at all, because I just don't see him learning at this point. I don't think he sees any more clearly than he did before. I don't know if that's just an intentional thing for Mary Shelley, thinking that this character is in that position, and I disagree that he's not, or I'm supposed to recognize that, of course he doesn't, like, that's not true. He thinks that, but it's not true. So, I felt as if I was about the commission of a dreadful crime and avoided with shuddering anxiety any encounter with my fellow creatures. This Arkansas, all this whole passage, these 3 paragraphs here remind me a lot of William Godwin's Caleb Williams, on this guilty, like this feeling of guilt all the time that someone is walking around with, and Victor's feeling that right now. And then I cast my basket into the sea. I listened to the gurgling sound as it sunk. That sounds kind of gross in a way, like like I understand it's just body parts and rocks,
It's just body parts.
but it sounds it sounds like a drowning of a live person because of the gurgling, because there's air coming up. Gurgling is something that, I don't know. I think you would be more accustomed to think a person makes a gurgling sound, not, an inanimate object. So
yeah, the realism of these moments is just striking, and you gotta wonder where Mary Shelley got that from.
yeah. The well, yeah. Did she dump anything over into the water? He falls asleep in the little boat now, and then suddenly he wakes up and the wind is high and the waves are threatening to knock, take his little boat under. The only resource was to drive before the wind.
Well, and he says this a very interesting thing. When I awoke, I again felt as if I belonged to a race of human beings like myself.
Yeah.
So, he's been going on for this and for the past 2 chapters about how he is alone, he's separated from his fellow creatures, he is wretched. And suddenly, he feels that he belongs to a race of human beings like him, which again is something that he has just ultimately denied the creature in with, finality.
But he feels like I've done the task or I didn't do the task, but I've at least completed, like I'm not doing that anymore. And now I can go back to being a person with everybody else. You can't, and the creature has to teach him a lesson. Teacher has to let him know that no, you can't. You're going to be as miserable as me forever. But I also like this. He's adrift, and I'm assuming he's out of sight of land at this point, and like the terror of waking up and realizing, oh no, where's land? Must be really scary. But also, it's also weird reading this, knowing that Percy Shelley will die in a storm off the coast of Italy just a few years after she writes this. I mean,
yeah, so when she was revising this, that would have already happened, like the 1831 edition. Would have been put out with this present in her mind.
And but I think that, and she is clearly worried about Percy and the trips that he takes, but he's still just, at the time she's writing this novel, he's at least still only a river boater, whatever you call it. So he only sails on rivers and lakes. He has not moved to the sea yet, which will be in the end when he dies because of that. But she is worried about it because he can't swim and he likes to sail. But after that, Victor is, he says, I thought of Elizabeth, of my father, and Clerval, and sunk into a reverie so despairing and frightful that even now, when the scene is on the point of closing before me forever, even now, he's talking like when I'm telling the story to Walton, I shudder to reflect on it. He sees land and he tries to reach it, and he does. I found myself suddenly transported back to the neighborhood of civilized man. Fortunately, I had money with me. Hey, that's nice. He brought his wallet with him.
While getting rid of body parts. Yeah, that's very convenient.
But he's surprised because the people aren't nice to him. They're whispering together. They're real suspicious, and he's like, what's the name here? And they're, you will know that soon enough. Maybe you come to a place that will not prove much to your taste. The frowning and angry countenances of his companions. Who's often not treated nicely when he meets other people? Would that be the creature, Victor? And again, it's another instance of Victor is now in the position where he is, because he did not learn the responsibilities of what he did, now he is constantly learning how he is more like the creature as the rest of this novel goes on. And
how the tables turn, or
Yeah.
how the turntables.
and then he even has the gall to say, like, is not this a free country? Like, what? Like, Richter's going to assert his rights here.
Also, he has just landed in Ireland, which does not have a great
Yes.
relation with.
He even talks about, Englishmen. He says, what the custom of the English may, like, it's not the custom of Englishmen. And they're like,
yeah, you're in Ireland.
Don't say
and
you're
the
English.
Irish, the Irish have been like mistreated by the English for centuries. And you're like, aren't you English? Why won't you treat me nicely?
Well, he hears them speaking English and he assumes that they're English, but they're not. They're Irish. And but he's asserting his rights here, and this is like, the creature did this too, and you wouldn't listen. Then they say, you're to give an account of the death of a gentleman who was found murdered here last night. And Victor, startled, but he says, I was innocent. That could easily be proved.
Yeah, I was in a boat in the middle of nowhere disposing of body parts, and I can very easily prove I have an alibi. I was committing a different murder.
Yes, and of course, like, it happens if you're completely innocent, like, say, Justine was, of course that you're not going to be convicted of a murder. Victor, the creature, as we will learn in the next chapter, has placed Victor in a position where he is actually being treated like Justine. And he will go through that ordeal just as Justine had to go through. And it finishes, little did I then expect the calamity that was in a few moments to overwhelm me and extinguish in horror and despair all fear of ignominy or death. I must pause here, for it requires all my fortitude to recall the memory of the frightful events which I am about to relate in proper detail to my recollection. So we get a little cliffhanger thing like, oh my God, something really bad has happened. And Victor is, going to reveal that in the next chapter. So
it really is. It really does read like a serialized novel where you have all of these cliffhangers. These lovely cliffhangers. It would have been a great serialized novel.
Yeah, there's a lot of moments. Well, I mean, it's the kind of plot that has those moments of, dum-dum, some big things happen periodically, so you can make nice breaks there. And this is one of those breaks that it's really set up. It's really set up well with the chapter divisions, that Victor doesn't know where. I mean, we've said he's in Ireland. He doesn't know he's in Ireland. He doesn't know, what's going on. And of course there's the the very first time I read Frankenstein, I thought, he can't go from the Orkneys to Ireland. Like, that doesn't make any sense. But it's
magic.
It is, and I chalk it up to a mistake on Mary Shelley's part to think that he could travel overnight, drift overnight, and that's where his boat would end up. It actually takes longer than that. It's not like it couldn't happen, but it would take a few days, and it would also be the greatest stroke of luck. So the luck is fine that those things happen, but it's actually not even possible for him to do it the way he did it. And but
yeah, Leslie Klinger calculates that, even at best, he could not have traveled more than 200 miles, which I assume the Orkneys are further than that from Ireland.
So, well, more next week on where he is.
Before we finish up, we just had a great comment in the Q&A. I feel like we have to share. It's very macabre, but about the gurgling, Maxwell says, I wonder if Mary ever imagined guiltily about the drowning of Harriet, who was Percy's former wife, who killed herself by drowning.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, I talked about Percy. Yeah, but it's actually, when she's writing this, Percy's wife commits suicide, jumps into the river, and her mother does. Her mother tried it twice, or at least once. Mary Wollstonecraft tried to kill herself that way.
Yeah, so that's such a great connection. Thank you for pointing that out. It's very macabre, but I think it's entirely possible that that was on her mind. I mean, I think as this novel evidences, Mary Shelley had a very vivid imagination, and specifically a very vivid imagination for the macabre and the kind of the horrifying and the fantastic.
Yeah. Well, Franken readers, we hit the whole thing today, and you know, in the time we should do it, which is nice.
In exactly 2 hours. Congratulations, Ed.
Thank you all for tuning in today. We will repost this recording on our website, and if that's how you're watching now, thanks for watching it this way. We have a Sundays with Frankenstein Facebook group where we continue the conversation. Look us up on Facebook and join in that conversation. It's quite lively and quite fun. I'm always available to answer questions via email as well. Next week, Dan Hodge will be back to co-host with me. And the final schedule is Dan will be next week. And then Lauren and Mary, the Ghoul Guides, will be on April 18th. And then Anastasia will be here for the final bit of chapter 7 in the last week. And then we do a wrap-up show, an after show with all the co-hosts and myself on May 2nd. Don't forget, Franken Cocktails is this Wednesday night. I hope you will register for that if you're a member. You are welcome. It is free for members. And if you're not a member, join and then come for free. It will be fun. We'll have a good time. The first edition of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is just one of the many gems of the Rosenbach's collections. If you're looking for more virtual engagements, head on over to the Rosenbach website. Check out the other virtual offerings we have, including our gallery gateways and exhibitions. And the Rosenbach's also open right now. You can come and visit safely. You can get time tickets. You go online and sign up for a time ticket where it's just yourself, whatever party you're with goes through by yourself through the museum. And you can see our new exhibition on the 19th century Japanese sailor Manjiro. I ask you all to please support the Rosenbach. You can do that also by donation. That would be wonderful. Anastasia, thanks again. The show's almost becoming me and Anastasia, and then occasionally someone else comes on, right?
It's an absolute pleasure. But no, the other co-hosts are so wonderful, and you know, I tune in on the weeks I'm not here, and you're
the one that really does.
It's been absolutely wonderful.
Excellent. Well, I will see you on Wednesday night. And everyone else, join us next week on Sundays with Frankenstein for chapters 4 and 5 of volume 3, where we get to see Victor's Irish vacation. And we also hear Victor make the worst ever prenup promise in history to Elizabeth. So once again, we'll be played out by Tucker Christine's pleated gazelle song, It's Alive. Farewell, wandering spirits, and remember you have hope and the world before you. Bye-bye.